Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to look at how to configure the new generic OAuth2 token, which can then be used with a generic REST connector in forms as well as process models. But before we look into that, let's look at the scenario under which you might want to use a generic OAuth2 token. As you might already know, AgilePoint already supports a lot of out-of-the-box connectors for popular line of business systems like SharePoint, Salesforce, Dynamics CRM, document repositories, etc. However, we also provide a generic REST, WCF, SOAP, and OData connector for connecting to systems for which integration might not exist out of the box. Out of these, REST connector is the most commonly used to connect to the custom homegrown systems or the ones which do not exist out of the box, as most systems nowadays have a RESTful API which exists as a de facto standard for APIs. However, there can be situations where a custom REST service might be protected with OAuth2 authentication. In our REST shape, we already used to support a lot of OAuth2 token types, but there can always be boundary cases where REST service is protected with a homegrown OAuth2 system or something which is not supported by AgilePoint for authentication out of the box. The only option previously in this case was to work with AgilePoint team to create a new access token type for your system and expose it in the portal so that the REST connector can use it. This is a common challenge for products which deal with integration, and what can make it even more complex is the fact that there can be a lot of variations which exist in the OAuth2 spec, which means different services might implement authentication differently. So there was no generic way of handling this. The most famous API testing tool used in the market today is called Postman. Perhaps every developer has used it at some point of time in their career. Postman addresses this challenge by providing a generic OAuth2 configuration screen where user can choose which type of OAuth2 flow he intends to use and provides inputs corresponding to that selected flow type. With AgilePoint NX version 8.0, we are introducing a similar capability where you could create a generic OAuth2 token which can then be used in the REST connector for process and forms, and hence you won't need to develop a new access token type for homegrown OAuth2 systems. Though this is not a common use case, it does save a considerable amount of time for your developers if they run into such scenarios. So let's look at this in action. So let's first look at how Postman does it. So I'm in Postman collection over here, and if I say edit, if I go to authorization, in the authorization, AgilePoint, as you know, already supports basic and bearer token and OAuth2 kind of authorization models. I'm going to select OAuth2 for now and say get new access token. So the way Postman handles it is there are various grant types which are made available: authorization code based, password credential based, client credential based, and then corresponding to whatever you've selected, the parameters are specified over here. So you can enter an access token URL, a client ID, client secret, maybe a scope as specified in the specification of that system. And it also lets you specify that you can either send it as a head authorization header, or you can send the client credentials in the body. So with this approach, you could create a generic kind of a screen like what Postman has done, and then use that token as part of your API calls. What Postman doesn't provide you is the way of automatically refreshing this token. When this kind of a system right now, Postman, you are using it from your desktop, and as a user I can go in and generate a new OAuth2 token and then include it in my APIs. However, when it is running as a headless service in the server, there has to be a mechanism of automatically refreshing that access token as well. So let's switch to my browser over here. If I go to manage, and if I go to global access tokens in this case, and click on plus button, there is a new access token type called OAuth 2.0, and it has a very similar interface. You can give a token name, you can select what kind of a type of token you are OAuth2 flow you want to use, the grant type, and based on whatever you have selected, the corresponding parameters are shown and you can enter the value. What more is that you can also set up the renewal rate as well. So it automatically handles the token expiration. So you can set it according to your needs, whatever is there in the specification of that system. So let's take an example of one which I have already configured. This is for box.com, though AgilePoint does support box.com token type already out of the box, so probably not the best use case to show this, but I mean, I'm just showing you how it could have been done without using the access token. And similar concept would be applied to any homegrown OAuth2 system if you had one. So box.com documentation says it supports authorization code flow, needs a redirect URL, an authorization URL, access token URL, and then client ID, client secret, right? And it says that send it in the header. So as you can see, I specified this, I specified the renewal time as per box specifications. And once I'm done configuring this, if I go over here, I drag and drop into the process model RESTful activity, click next. I'm going to use the advanced mode. If I go to authentications over here, as I mentioned, we support basic authentication as well. But if I go to the OAuth2 dialog over here, the tab over here, you see we already support a lot of OAuth2 token types previously. There's a long list of this. However, now you see one more over here listed called OAuth2. If you select that, the global access token which you created is available in the drop down and you can select it. So with this, your custom REST services which are protected with your own OAuth2 systems or whatever is not listed in the drop down previously can now be consumed easily without having to create one explicitly over here. Thanks a lot for your time.